9:12 a.m. on Sunday morning. I'm meteorologist Matt Laughlin here. We're tracking a potential for still storms, active weather, and severe weather as we look toward Tuesday, late in the day in particular. Still a time frame we're kind of concentrating on there. I think all forms of severe weather still possible, including the potential for some tornadoes, though there's still, like yesterday, like the day before, remain questions as to how many and how strong, simply related to the fact that we are likely still looking at questions about moisture, the lower level fuel that fuels thunderstorms, how much of that makes it into far northeast Mississippi. Projections still a little dodgy on that. Some tend to have underdo that a little bit or still kind of underdoing it. But there's real questions as to how far north that ends up moving. And that's a good thing. That means that could limit the most significant severe threat on the north side of this event. For a March event, early March event, late February event, that's typical. And so we're hoping that to be the case. But let's kind of talk through sort of what we're looking at here for a moment. And here's our severe risk area as it stands as of Sunday morning, about 9:10, 9:15 in the morning. You will notice a couple things. First and foremost, we have that level 1 risk around the outside there because now we're within that time frame where we get it the last 3 days, today, tomorrow, day after that. Again, Tuesday be the day after that. Storm Prediction Center, Norman, Oklahoma, part of NOAA, does put out that level 1 risk. You can see that there. We, like we have been the last few days, remain in a combination, depending on where you're at, of level 3 or level 2 risk in our area. And these numbers in the corner, there are names to go along with them as well. I don't use those simply because I think the 1 through 5 is just clearer. But have an escalating level of number of reports, right? So your odds of being hit by something are much greater in a high risk versus a marginal. Can you still get something significant out of a slight or a marginal? Absolutely, especially if you're the one that ends up getting hit by it. But this comes back to the math, and so that comes back to this. Probability of severe weather within 25 miles of a point. We find that 33 to 44% does include locations such as Louisville, Ackerman, Winona, Grenada, kind of on the edge there. And then if you imagine, rather than this hard line here, this is kind of a gradient that would shade to the north and east. You can see certainly the greatest risk is on the southwest portion of our coverage area. And to go back to this for a second, I'm going to revert to yesterday's risk for tomorrow. So as you can, for Tuesday. So as you can see, there has definitely been a shift back to the south related to this, and we owe that back to the questions relating to moisture. We've talked about that fairly extensively the last couple of days, that there were some questions there, and thankfully those questions still remain. Here's a look at the kind of overall surface analysis would be another word we call that. What we're looking at here, of course, the 30s that we have in place for temperatures, but then that drier air with dew points measures moisture coming into the teens. That's some pretty dry air. Even, by the way, drier than it was an hour ago as we wait for the 9 o'clock update to kind of come in there. So that drier air has shoved in from the north and east and kind of pushed the moisture farther south and west, and so down into the Gulf of Mexico. And so you have to get way down in there in the Gulf of Mexico to have moisture that's sufficient enough for severe thunderstorms to take place. And so we weren't super humid yesterday, but we were 8 to 10 degrees more moist than we are now. Of course, last hour or so we've seen more of that dry air. The point in this, as expected, that front that's kind of moved through has shoved the moisture even farther south, and the question becomes how much can return. It's going to kind of sneak up from the west. I like to call it just-in-time moisture, the way in which this could play out. Or finally, by the way, in the time frame, we can look at some of our high resolution projections, our really high resolution ones. And you'll notice this one here, 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning, what time frame this would be depicting. This is what we call the NAM. We call it the high res NAM, or NAM 3 kilometer. And so you can see it's pretty close on those measures of moisture being as low as they are. So that is not something we don't anticipate. But I want you to watch this green back into Texas and those bluish colors, and eventually you kind of get into purple when you get into really more moist amounts there. But notice how for the really next 24 hours between now and this time tomorrow, we keep fairly dry. But see what you have back going on in Texas here? You have this wedge of moisture that's developing as moist air coming right off the Gulf of Mexico kind of works its way up into Texas, and you can see it gradually working its way. Oops, and I clicked that, and that's going to bring up sounding, which is fine, but we're not getting into that right yet. And so you can see how there's more moisture back west. This would be early Tuesday morning. By even early Tuesday morning, we're a little more moist than we are now, but that's 39 is not a high dew point. And so you can see how you have some of this moisture coming off the Gulf, and then you have this wedge of moisture that's quickly going to migrate eastward, right? I run out of data for this model, but 6 p.m. On Tuesday evening, and that's what we're looking at here, 6 p.m. Tuesday. You'll notice in the far northeast portion of the state, mid-50s dew points, that's not enough to be able to pull off significant severe weather. But you end up a lot of times in this case where you have this wedge of moisture that's right at the front edge of what could be a squall line trying to move into the area. We've anticipated that squall line. We've anticipated that narrow corridor of moisture. But when we start talking about this risk level, the way in which this gets upgraded to a greater risk level is if your opportunity, going back to the math here, if your opportunity is greater, right? Okay, so your opportunity becomes greater if you get a line coming through and something popping up in advance. The most likely zone for that stuff to pop up in advance, back to the south and west, closer to that, again, where that moisture, what we're depicting here, is greater. So let's look at about, again, we still have a fairly wide choice, for lack of a better way to put it, of different models that we're looking at here. But that's not the best way to say that. Better way to say that would be that we're looking at a number of models, but they still show kind of a variety of things. So we're picking this up. This would be about 6 p.m. Wednesday there. So this is the one we were looking at a second ago. Not 6 p.m. Wednesday, 6 p.m. Tuesday. Technically with Zulu time, which is what all meteorologists use around the world. Greenwich Mean Time, based out of Greenwich, England, and so that's kind of the time that we then from there have a standardized time that all models kind of run off of. So all that to say, 6 p.m. So you can see how some projections are a little farther north with that more dense moisture, also slower. In this case, slower is giving a little more time for moisture return. Some are a little faster, but all kind of have kind of a cap on how far north it goes. The lower resolution NAM, this is the higher resolution one, the lower resolution is a little bit farther north. And just because this is higher resolution, there's some ways in which it's better and there's some ways in which it's worse. So I wouldn't necessarily throw out the lower resolution one, but to say that there's just ultimately only a kind of a narrow corridor right at the front where perhaps you get just enough moisture and you have just enough forcing to get that tornado threat. And that's part of what I think is largely to this point keeping us from a higher risk level here, and is the reason in the far northeast corner of the state we've seen this trimmed back some, which is probably a good choice in this case. So as we go back here to our projection, I'm going to pull up kind of a future radar for a moment. And again, this is the very end of our model run here. First thing that it's easy to automatically see is, oh, well, we've got storms developing in advance. Why is that not increasing our opportunity? Well, I believe that these storms, kind of based on the moisture we were looking at, and another way in which we kind of show that using instability, I'm going to show the mean layer CAPE, convective available potential energy. And the point on that, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but this is kind of another way to show that fuel, probably a better way to show that fuel for thunderstorms. You see, there's definitely a northern extent for where there's more significant CAPE. Now, I have other versions of CAPE, what we call most unstable CAPE. And you'll note that it's those same spots up north there. And I wish there was a way I could kind of mark that on your screen, but you just point out about that spot. Maybe stick your finger on your phone there, or just have a mental image of where that spot is for a second, right? So if I go back to that mean layer CAPE, well, there's nothing there, right? It's kind of, okay, so these, things show you it's that third one down there, right? Well, there's no actual CAPE. And if we look at the precipitation, go back there, you'll notice, well, there are some thunderstorms there. What's going on? So these would be what we call elevated. In order for tornadoes to form, you have to have the air that's flowing into the thunderstorm has to originate with pockets of air, for lack of a better way to put it, at a low enough level to the ground, to what we would call surface-based. And if that's not the case, then they can be rotating a lot aloft, but not produce a tornado. So all that to say, these storms up here, these lead storms, while they do pop up, and it's like, whoop, we've got storms going up in advance, there's not enough lower level moisture for those to work off of. In a scenario where we were, say, April, and we had more time for moisture to get up here, or just any case where we had more time for moisture to get up here, we'd be really concerned with those. And that's something that a couple of days ago when we were looking at that peak risk, the multiple opportunities, we were saying, well, we've got stuff developing in advance. Okay, there's an example of the model now clarifying there's still stuff developing in advance, but it's likely elevated, and that changes things. Knowing that it's elevated tells us the likelihood of that lead stuff producing tornadoes remains very low. Now, listen, it's possible that we could end up with more moisture than what we're depicting there, but certainly that's one of those positive signs. What you also see here is you see that line of thunderstorms moving in, and that line again is going to have a zone where we have just enough moisture kind of flowing in from the south and east, and perhaps you do get this to try to spin up a tornado on the front side of this. And that again is why we still do retain this at least level 2 severe weather threat to level 3 severe weather threat in our area. More moisture, greater chance that even with that single line you get a tornado to form back south and west. And the farther north you go, it's less likely that that lower level moisture makes it farther north. I think there's still damaging wind potential in either case, but those are at least some positive signs that we're looking at with this setup. And again, another way we'll look at that moisture, I just want to hit this, and then I think we're not going to make this a super long one, I think, this morning. But you can see our projections still, some are farther north than others. That's, again, that NAM, that lower resolution version of our one high resolution model we have at this point. But it is not alone at how far north it's bringing some of that lower level moisture. So, again, it's possible that some of that lower level moisture could exceed expectations on a few cases. So that's the reason we're still keeping that in mind. So again, kind of headline is this. Here's our severe weather risk for Tuesday. We anticipate that, again, this is late in the day Tuesday, late afternoon really at earliest. We'll probably have some storms before that, but late afternoon at earliest and more Tuesday evening into the overnight hours. Now, projections are still trying to work out that timing, and that is one more thing we can bring up here as far as timing is concerned. I do want to look at a different projection on that for a moment. We'll call the European here. And this, again, lower resolution one. This is one we've been looking at the last few days. And now we can see, okay, it is developing that stuff in advance. That's what we were seeing a moment ago. But as we looked at on that other projection, it's probably more elevated, not surface-based. So it's one of the things that could potentially, thankfully limit the overall expectation on how bad this gets. So let's go back to that moisture. I want to show you what we call the run-to-run change here. We're going to bring this up. So this would be, so this is about 9 p.m., right? And previous runs. And you'll notice how the positioning is pretty close. This is what we were looking at yesterday when we were talking about this. And by the way, they are getting ready for Mardi Gras parades. So if you hear a lot of sirens behind me, everything's okay. They just have we're in New Orleans on our last day down here, and they are getting all of the floats ready for Mardi Gras parades. So the police escorts are. Hey, y'all, there's some big ones out there if you want to look out the window. Okay, they're apparently over it. Anyway, here's the moisture. And you can see it's still pretty similar. So I don't think a whole lot has changed. It's just our confidence in location probably has increased more into this zone here. And I think our timing, based on what I'm looking at there, still looks like probably as early as, let's say, late afternoon, 5 o'clock or so. You're talking West Mississippi, like 4 or 5 o'clock, absolutely a possibility. And you're talking East Mississippi as late as, midnight, maybe slightly after that. So that's kind of your general time frame there. Time frame as it works west to east, primarily a line of active weather that could potentially be damaging winds, certainly heavy rainfall, lightning, and possibly tornadoes. We are not expecting this to be a tornado outbreak in our area. Let's be clear about that. Not expecting this to be a tornado outbreak in our area based on what we're looking at now. Now listen, if moisture values tick up a little bit, entirely possible, but that certainly has not been the trend on this event, then maybe our confidence would increase in that. But for now, it looks like perhaps a few tornadoes. And listen, again, that one that hits you could be strong and impactful for you. So that's something we can't rule out. But certainly the strong tornado threat is probably more likely to the south. But there's a lot of upper level winds and shear, and that's not something I've gone into a lot here. I'm probably not going to go into a lot today. If it still holds up tomorrow, we'll get a little more into that. But there's still enough there that we're going to have some rotating storms to try to produce tornadoes. So that's, again, here's our probability. And our expectation is that unless we see something different, the bullseye probably stays pretty close to here. I don't know that the bulls. First off, I don't think Tupelo ever ends up in the middle of the bullseye on this event. I think the bullseye is pretty good on where it's giving you the idea, or as Penny calls it, the avocado. The avocado is positioned probably appropriately here. Um, and you'll note that that is, again, for those that joined us a little late, that is a shift back to the south and west versus yesterday's projections, expectations from NOAA and the Storm Prediction Center, and then today's. So I agree exactly with that. As we talked about yesterday, that moisture, that drier air has shoved in, and that has kind of made that difference. All right. So let's go ahead. I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up here. Again, updates. We'll have another update tomorrow morning as we're continuing to kind of watch the situation and get a little closer. Be thinking again, be preparing for Tuesday night just in case. But again, the headline, this is not likely to be a tornado outbreak. Again, this is not likely to be a tornado outbreak. This is a situation where we could have some rotating storms that try to produce tornadoes, but certainly something we'll watch. Okay. Usually, I pray and we do the whole thing. I'm going to ask you to help me with something here for a moment. My mom's in the hospital. Went in Friday night, I guess. Today Sunday. Yeah. Anyway, trying to figure out what's wrong with her. She seems like she's doing okay and not okay at the same time. So if you'll pray with me on that for a moment, I'm gonna say something about that, and then we'll move on to what we're gonna say. Um, God, please help mom. Please help her to get better. Please help the doctors to help her to get better. Give them wisdom and guidance and understanding as to what their next steps should be. But just give her strength to fight and get better. And God, I know your plan is perfect, and I know that obviously that you will do what is best for the plan and for. But I pray that you heal her and help her to get better. Be with Dad, help him to be strong in this moment for her, and God, I just pray that everything goes well. You know what's in my heart and what I'm looking for. And God, I just pray that your healing hand is on her in this time. God, help these folks to make smart choices as we get close to this event. God, I pray that things fall out of alignment and this doesn't turn into something, and it can be a whole big bag of nothing. But keep us safe, make us wise, help us make good choices. And thank you for this opportunity to speak with these people this morning. Pray this in your son's powerful name. Amen. Okay. So I'm not sure if I'll have it as a morning update tomorrow. I'll probably do a morning update tomorrow, probably similar-ish time. So we'll let you know as we get a little closer. But y'all have a safe, a happy day. I would not spend a whole lot of time worrying about this, but that's just my general opinion on most severe weather events as well. It's, know when it's going to happen, know what's possible with it, and then live your life and come back and check and see, later, just because it's not worth worrying. Yeah, God will take care of us. Anyway, y'all have a